6 days. That is how long remains before the 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran expires. And right now, the world is watching three things simultaneously: a U.S. naval blockade tightening around Iranian ports, a second round of peace talks that could happen in days, or not at all, and an American president who says a final deal is, very possible, before the end of April. Welcome to day 46 of the Iran war. The guns are largely quiet. The diplomats are running out of time. And the pressure, economic, military, and political, is building toward what could be either a historic peace agreement or a catastrophic second round of strikes. Here is the complete picture, right now. To understand today, you need a rapid recap of the last week, because the speed of events has been extraordinary. April 7th, Trump announces the 2-week ceasefire, brokered by Pakistan. The world exhales. Markets surge. Oil drops 6%. April 8th, day 1 of the ceasefire nearly collapses. Israel pounds Lebanon. Iran briefly closes Hormuz again. Vice President J.D. Vance calls it a fragile truce. April 11th to 12th, the Islamabad talks. Vance, Witkoff, and Kushner fly to Pakistan for what became 21 hours of face-to-face negotiations, the first direct U.S.-Iran engagement since 2015. On Sunday, after the marathon session, Vance announced that Iran chose not to accept our terms. The key sticking point was nuclear. The simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, Vance said. April 13th, Trump responds to the failed talks with a new escalation. Following the failure of the Islamabad talks, Trump announced a U.S. naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, stating that the U.S. Navy will prevent ships from entering or exiting Iranian ports and intercept vessels that have paid tolls to Iran. And then, today, Trump tells the New York Post that a deal is still very possible before the month is out. The question is, what has actually changed? Despite the blockade, despite the failed talks, despite the ceasefire ticking toward expiry, Trump is projecting confidence. They'd like to make a deal very badly, Trump told reporters at the White House on Monday, adding that Iran had called the U.S. that same morning. Trump told the New York Post that the next round of U.S. Iran talks could be happening over the next 2 days in Islamabad. He had initially suggested talks would be a little bit slow and might happen in Europe, but called back to the outlet about 30 minutes later with updated information. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres added to the cautious optimism, saying it is highly probable that peace talks will restart. Vance himself said he believes the Iranians sitting across the table in Islamabad wanted to make a deal, and that he is going to continue fighting for the grand bargain that Trump wants to make with Tehran. But here is the critical context. Trump acknowledged the main obstacle himself. A major sticking point in talks has been the stipulation that Iran forego a nuclear weapon, Trump said. He said Tehran did not agree to that, and, if they don't agree, there's no deal. In other words, both sides say they want a deal. Both sides say the other side is the obstacle. And the ceasefire expires in 6 days. The U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports is the most significant military escalation since the ceasefire began, and it is already reshaping the global economy. According to U.S. Central Command, only ships entering and leaving Iranian ports are blockaded, freedom of navigation remains for other vessels. The U.S. Navy also began mine clearance operations in the Strait, with 2 guided missile destroyers crossing through for the first time since the war began. The U.S. also announced it will not renew short-term authorization permitting the sale of Iranian oil already stranded at sea, as part of its maximum pressure strategy against Iran. Trump has been characteristically blunt about what happens if Iran resists. He warned on Truth Social that if any Iranian ships come anywhere close to our blockade, they will be immediately eliminated. Iran's response was equally sharp. Iran's parliament speaker Ghalibaf posted a map of gas prices near the White House, writing, "Enjoy the current price of gasoline." With what is being called a blockade, you will soon miss $4 to $5 gasoline. And the economic warning is real. Oil topped $100 a barrel again on Sunday following the blockade announcement. Karen Young, a senior scholar at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy, warned that it could be a long time before oil prices come down, even after the war ends, noting prices won't decline until the strait is fully reopened and damaged oil facilities are repaired. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz remains severely curtailed on the first full day of the blockade. Gene Seroka, executive director of the Port of Los Angeles, warned this will impact inventories of everyday goods, shoes, furniture, electronics. The blockade is not just a military instrument. It is economic warfare, and the cost is being paid at gas stations and ports around the world. To understand why talks failed and what a second round would need to resolve, you have to understand exactly what Iran refused to agree to at Islamabad. The White House published its non-negotiables. And the list is long. According to a White House official, the non-negotiable parameters Trump set for Iran include dismantling its major nuclear enrichment facilities, retrieving the more than 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium believed to be buried underground, accepting a broader peace, security and de-escalation framework that includes regional allies, ending funding for Hamas, Hezbollah and the Houthis, and fully opening the Strait of Hormuz with no tolls for passage. Iran's position, by contrast, centers on sovereignty, reconstruction and permanent peace. Iranian delegates could not agree on ending uranium enrichment, dismantling major nuclear facilities, allowing retrieval of its highly enriched uranium, accepting a broader security framework, ending proxy funding, or opening Hormuz without charging passage tolls. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi described what happened at Islamabad with visible frustration, saying that when the two sides were close to reaching an understanding, Iran encountered maximalism, shifting goalposts, and blockade. Vance acknowledged progress was made. Did we make progress? Yes. But we need to see the Strait of Hormuz fully open, and this is frankly one of the things where the Iranians tried to move the goalposts. The nuclear issue is the load-bearing wall. Everything else, sanctions, Hormuz, proxies, might be negotiable with creative diplomacy. But Iran's right to enrich uranium versus America's insistence on complete nuclear disarmament is a gap that 21 hours in Islamabad could not close. While the diplomats were talking, and during the ceasefire, satellites were watching something very important happening inside Iran. Satellite images reviewed by CNN show that Iran has been working to remove debris blocking the entrances to its underground missile bases during the ceasefire. Front-end loaders can be seen scooping rubble from blocked tunnels and loading it into dump trucks, at multiple sites across the country. U.S. intelligence assessed that roughly half of Iran's missile launchers were still intact after a month of fighting. Many of those launchers may have been buried underground when U.S. and Israeli strikes collapsed tunnel entrances, but Iran is now digging back out. Sam Lair, a research analyst at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies, noted this was entirely expected. This aligns with the overall concept of operations for the missile city: you eat the first attack, dig yourself out, and then launch again. This is a critical data point for the talks. Iran is using the ceasefire to reconstitute military capabilities. That is not a violation of the ceasefire agreement, but it is a reminder that time works in Iran's favor if negotiations drag on, and it will harden the U.S. position that any deal must include verifiable, permanent disarmament, not just a pause. The Lebanon question, the crack that nearly broke the ceasefire on day one, is slowly moving toward a separate track of diplomacy. Israel and Lebanon have agreed to hold direct talks after a preliminary meeting between officials in Washington, D.C., with Lebanese officials seeking a ceasefire and Israeli officials seeking the disarmament of Hezbollah. In the meantime, Lebanese and Israeli diplomats participated in rare preliminary negotiations in Washington today, amid fears that continued Israeli strikes in Lebanon could threaten the broader Iran truce. But the violence has not stopped. At least 35 people were killed in Israeli attacks on Lebanon in the past 24 hours, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. And the gap in expectations remains enormous. Lebanon wants a full ceasefire. Israel wants Hezbollah disarmed. Iran says Lebanon must be included in any final deal. The US and Israel say Lebanon is a separate conflict. Iranian President Pezeshkian spoke by phone with French President Emmanuel Macron today, saying that ending hostilities in Lebanon is a core element of Iran's 10-point ceasefire plan, directly at odds with both Trump and Netanyahu. As long as Lebanon remains outside the ceasefire framework, Iran has the political cover to resist U.S. demands and the domestic justification to keep its finger, as the IRGC puts it, on the trigger. One of the most significant developments of this week is the growing international pressure, not just on Iran, but on the United States as well. French President Emmanuel Macron announced preparations for a peaceful multinational mission aimed at restoring freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, saying he would convene a conference in the coming days, together with Britain. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer told lawmakers in the House of Commons that the strait must reopen with no conditions and no tolls. And announced he and Macron would convene a summit of leaders to drive forward the international effort to end the conflict and unblock the key oil route. The UK reportedly will not take part in Trump's naval blockade itself, despite Trump's suggestions that Britain was sending minesweepers. Relations between Trump and Starmer have been strained over Trump's decisions to initiate and escalate the war. Macron, who spoke with both Trump and Iranian President Pezeshkian on Monday, said, "I expressed my hope that the ceasefire will be fully respected by each of the belligerents, across all areas of confrontation, including in Lebanon. This is a necessary condition for the ceasefire to be credible and lasting. America is not just negotiating with Iran. It is increasingly navigating a growing friction with its own European allies over how this war is being prosecuted and how a deal must be structured. So the central question, is a deal by end of April actually realistic?" The ceasefire expires April 21. Talks are expected to resume within days, potentially in Islamabad, potentially in Europe. Trump says it's very possible. Vance says the ball is in Iran's court. Iran says it wants a deal but keeps encountering maximalism and shifting goalposts. The White House has confirmed it is open to resuming in-person talks as soon as Trump believes Iran is prepared to meet his demands. Which could mean a second meeting before April 21, or potentially extending the ceasefire if talks are progressing. There is a real deal to be had here. Both sides have confirmed that most issues have been narrowed. The nuclear question is the final, and most intractable, barrier. Iran will not simply hand over 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium and dismantle facilities that took decades to build. The U.S. will not accept a deal that leaves Iran with a latent nuclear weapons capability. But here is what makes a deal possible despite all of that: both sides are exhausted. Brent crude has risen roughly 40% since the war began. U.S. gas prices are up 40% from pre-war levels. Iran's economy is being strangled. The IRGC is digging out of rubble. And the entire global economy is screaming for the Strait of Hormuz to reopen. That kind of pressure has a way of producing deals that looked impossible 2 weeks earlier. Day 46. A naval blockade. A ceasefire expiring in 6 days. A second round of talks that could happen tomorrow or never. A president who says a deal is very possible, and a Supreme National Security Council in Tehran that still says its hands are on the trigger. This is the most consequential week of the Iran war since it began on February 28. What happens between now and April 21 will determine whether this conflict ends at the negotiating table, or resumes with strikes more devastating than anything we have seen so far. We will be here for every development. If this breakdown is useful to you, please hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support is what keeps this channel on the story that is shaping the world. Stay informed. Stay safe. We'll see you at the next update.